The number one cause of the fear of failure in sports is the fear of the consequence of what will happen if you make a mistake. The fear of failure is focused on mistakes. It's focused on you failing, you messing up, you not performing the way that you want to perform. But I want you to think about any sort of mistake that you are afraid of making. Let's take the example of a basketball player who turns the ball over. In that situation, when the basketball player turns the ball over, is that turnover painful? The act of turning the ball over is not necessarily painful. What is painful is the embarrassment that they feel after turning the ball over, the frustration that they feel, getting benched and having to watch the rest of the game from the sideline because their coach pulled them due to the mistake. It is the consequence in that situation, not necessarily turning the ball over, that is painful. Now, when I'm saying painful in terms of the fear of making mistakes, we're talking mostly about emotional pain. There is the fear of physical pain in sports, but that's more so the fear of injury. It's a very real fear, but it's a very different fear than the fear of failure. With the fear of failure, most of the pain that you feel is emotional pain, frustration, embarrassment, getting benched, having your stats drop. Another fear that's very common is baseball and softball players having the fear of striking out when they're hitting, right? Now, when you strike out as a hitter, are you necessarily in pain when you strike out? No. So you're not afraid of the act of striking out. You are afraid of the frustration, the embarrassment, right? Having to walk back to the dugout with your head hanging low, having your stats drop, wondering what everybody thinks of you. Do they think that you're not a good hitter anymore because you struck out this time and maybe you're having a bad streak right now and you're in a slump? The number one commonality between all athletes I'm working with when we're working on the fear of failure is that they are afraid of the consequence of the mistake, not necessarily the mistake itself. It's important for us to make that distinction because it tells us where the focus is. The focus is on this consequence. So then that helps us when it comes to managing the fear of failure because we can go about managing this fear in a couple of different ways. So for yourself, if you are struggling with the fear of failure right now, I want you to think, what are the consequences that I'm honestly afraid of? Don't even worry about the mistake itself. We need to move past that. What is the reason that that mistake is something you are afraid of? Is it embarrassment? Is it that you think you'll get pulled from the game? Are you worried about what other people will think of you? Will your stats drop? Will you let your teammates down? What is that consequence that is driving your fear? Once we understand what that consequence is, it starts to make sense for us why there will be a change in your play. Because the number one reason that the fear of failure hurts you as an athlete is because of the timidness that you end up playing with. You end up holding yourself back. Maybe you play safe because you are scared. And now if we think about, what happens to your brain or what happens in your brain when you're afraid, right? Well, when you're afraid, the natural response of your mind will be to keep you safe. So if you are thinking about how you are afraid of these consequences, right? You're afraid of making that mistake. What will be the natural reaction your mind will have? The natural reaction your mind will have is to do something that will keep you safe. Now in sports, if you are out there playing and so you put yourself on the field or you put yourself on the court, you do not have the option of running the other way, right, and going home because you're out there playing. So what your mind will end up doing is keeping you safe. The way that you keep yourself safe is by hiding, right? So you'll find yourself hiding during games. This is where soccer and basketball players tell me that they're just not really getting involved anymore. Maybe as a softball player or a baseball player with hitting, you're hitting more timidly at the plate. You're not being as aggressive. In the field, you're not going after balls and after plays with as much aggression. Maybe on the football field, you find yourself shying away from tackles. Whenever you find yourself playing with fear, it's very easy to find yourself also playing timidly and holding yourself back. And it makes sense why you would be holding yourself back because your mind's reaction to fear is to keep you safe. The way you keep yourself safe during games when you are afraid is by holding yourself back to avoid the mistakes for which you are afraid of, right? Now, once again, this brings us back to the consequence that you are truly afraid of. There are a couple different tips that I have for you to help with this fear due to the fear of the consequence that's truly driving this fear of failure. The first tip is you want to ask yourself, can I handle that consequence? Once we identify that it is the consequence of the mistake that you are truly afraid of, if we can get you to feel confident that you can manage that consequence, a lot of the fear will be reduced. So I want you to imagine the consequence that you're afraid of, right? Put yourself in that situation and say, once this happens, can I handle that? So what will I do if I get benched? What will I do if I feel that other people are thinking less of me? Create yourself a strategy for that. Know exactly how you will handle that frustration, that embarrassment, being benched, right? How will you handle that? Once you handle that, or once you know how to handle that, now you have a plan in place. Let that plan calm your fears, right? Remind yourself that, hey, if this consequence happens, it's not that big of a deal and I know how to handle it. And even if it is a big deal, I still know how to handle it. I have a plan in place. I have actions in place that I will take when that happens or if that happens to where I don't need to be afraid of it anymore. So that's tip number 1. Make sure that you know how you will handle the consequence that you are afraid of. Tip number 2 is to identify where your focus is going into games. So when we look at this fear of failure once again, and we see how this fear can hold you back and can cause you to underperform, we identify that the fear causes you to play timidly, hold yourself back, and play scared. Well, all of that is due to this focus being on the consequence, right? Being on the fear itself. That shows us that your focus is in the future, your focus is on what might happen. What we need to do is we need to reel that attention back in and put your focus onto how you play your best. So when your mind is trying to keep you safe, your mind keeps you safe by playing scared, timidly, holding yourself back to avoid making these mistakes. There's another way that you can also avoid making mistakes and you can avoid this fear, and that's by playing well. But it's not always the natural response for your mind to have to say, now I want to play overly aggressive and give more effort to help myself play well. But that's exactly what you need to make sure that you are focused on doing. So when you know that you have this fear, and you know your focus is on the consequence, and so as a result, you end up playing scared and holding yourself back, you want to go to the other end of the spectrum and you want to focus on giving full effort. So the one thing I always suggest athletes do is when they are struggling with this fear of failure, reset their expectations and their goals for the game to only give 100% effort. That's it. You want to keep it very simple for yourself. So going into the game, say my number one goal today is to give 100% effort. The reason that I see this help with the fear of failure is because we know that when you have the fear of failure, you end up playing it safe, you end up holding yourself back, so you are not giving full effort. Give full effort during the game, set that as your goal, set that as your intention, instead of allowing your mind to naturally play it safe due to fear. So in summary, the fear of failure is driven by the fear of the consequence of what will happen. And we know that when you are focused on that consequence, you want to avoid that consequence, which causes you to play it safe and play timidly. What you want to do to help is number 1, figure out a way to handle that consequence if it does happen to help yourself feel more confident about that. And then number 2 is you want to focus on giving full effort for the game. Don't play it safe. Don't try to avoid mistakes. Give full effort and go out there with the intent to play your best. If you have any questions about this video or would like me to cover any other sports psychology topic, please let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I put out new videos each week on sports psychology and mental training.